We're hearing some reaction of the crowd. There is, of course, a myriad of issues that come out of the Canadian electorate following the recent election that has provided the members of Parliament who meet here. We can see the building now, the west block of the Parliament complex, and that is where later on today, when the King has arrived at the Senate chamber, which is off to our right, the Black Rod will turn up and go into the House of Commons, which is placed within the West Block. Things that we see will be very similar to the United Kingdom's state opening of Parliament, but what here takes place, and Canada has evolved from the British system, is a totally unique and separate way in which the nation of Canada chooses to keep and carry on its traditions. What is important is that the King is in Canada as King of that nation, and nothing to do with the fact that he is King of the United Kingdom. Of course, he is King of 15 nations, and the sense of anticipation to what the King will say in the speech from the throne is mounting here. It will have been written by the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who will have worked with his cabinet on a series of bills which are to be brought before the Parliament. And it's a tradition that goes right back in the United Kingdom's history to when Tudor monarchs used to read out what it was that they required their parliaments to enact. And I think that it is important to comprehend that for Canadians at the end of their election, with the new Parliament now assembled, they gathered yesterday in order to elect a Speaker, and the Speaker was dragged to the chair of the House of Commons, there in the building to the left, and he was dragged by two other members of Parliament, including one of them, Mark Carney. The new Speaker of the House of Commons in Canada is the Honourable Francis Carper-Leger, and he will be brought, along with all members of Parliament in Canada, to the Senate chamber later on. The King has been here now for 2 days. He arrived yesterday. Much was done after his arrival, a ceremonial moment when his aircraft landed, and he has spent the night at Rideau Hall, which is a short distance from the Parliament complex. And at Rideau Hall, which is the official residence of the Governor-General of Canada, who is Her Excellency the Right Honourable Mary Simon at the moment. She and her husband, the Right Honourable, His Excellency Whit Fraser, lived there, and it's sort of treated like the home of the head of state. So when the King comes, that is where he and the Queen were living last night. The King had many audiences, of course, with the Governor-General to start with, then also with his Prime Minister. And he had the chance to see the swearing in of the Queen as a member of the Honourable Privy Council of Canada. The Parliament of Canada grew out of the growing sense of independence for the nation that started back in 1867 with the British North America Act, which set Canada up as a dominion within what was then the British Empire. And it then saw an evolution in its dominion status as the then mother country over in the United Kingdom asked Canada to take on more and more of its own defence. And after all, Canadian servicemen and women played their part in both the First and Second World Wars. And that evolved Canada's sense of its own independence. But always the monarchs of the United Kingdom held sway as heads of state. But it was only in 1982 when the British Parliament completely repatriated its authorities as the Prime Minister's wife arrives at the Senate chamber. There is Mark Carney. It will be his responsibility to meet the King, Prime Minister of Canada, who was the Governor of the Bank of England until he returned to the country of his birth and was appointed Prime Minister and then called an election and was successful with his party and is now the head of government. He is at the saluting base waiting for the King. To either side of him in the distance, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who will play their part, and they wait for the King and Queen to pass by and for the national anthem to be played. And the words of the Canadian national anthem, "O Canada, our home and native land. True patriot love thou dost in us command. We see the rising fair, dear land, the true north, strong and free," a line that perhaps is at the heart of this ceremony today. You're watching the entrance of the Senate Chamber building, which is a short distance from this view of where the House of Commons is currently placed in what is the west block of the parliamentary estate. And shortly, the King and Queen's carriage will make its way along Wellington Street, which is where the crowds have gathered. It will pass along the top of Elgin Street and over to the place where we just saw the Prime Minister, the Honourable Mark Carney, take a salute from the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, at the start of this important day where Parliament is to be opened. It's the 45th Parliament of Canada. And here comes the forward procession, and the King and Queen will be in the State Landau, led by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and followed by an escort of equal number. Those will be members of the King's household, including the King's Secretary, who will play an important part here, the King's Secretary in Canada, who is Mr. Donald Booth, who will be carrying the speech that he will present to the King in due course. After the King and Queen's procession has passed down in front of our cameras, the King and Queen will be received at the Senate Chamber building, and there they will receive a royal salute. The 21 guns of welcome of the King of Canada will be fired, and His Majesty will inspect his guard of honor. The Prime Minister will then receive him and take him into the building.
Let your spirit preside over
unify Canada in the face of forces that want to tear the country apart. In 1977, when Queen Elizabeth II was here, Canada was facing the domestic threat of Quebec separatism that wanted to separate from Canada. I can tell you that just a few minutes ago, we had protesters here waving a flag in support.
Assembled, we may serve ever better the cause of peace and justice in our land and throughout the world. Amen. Let the doors be open, que l'on ouvre les portes.
And following prayers, we have a chance to see inside the Senate chamber. The two throne chairs are waiting. They were made from a tree that fell in Windsor Great Park and was presented by Elizabeth II to her people of Canada. And in the centre, at the back of the thrones, they have the King's coat of arms as King of Canada, and it's encircled by the motto of the Order of Canada: they seek to make a better nation. Those are all the senators who are playing their part in witnessing today. There are other guests too who are part of this event. But meanwhile, outside, waiting for the King to arrive, we can see already the outriders of the escort from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and they will be bringing the King and Queen, along with the Governor-General and her husband, to this opening of Parliament here in Ottawa. The state landau that the King and Queen will be travelling in was presented to the nation after it had been used by Lord Hopetoun when he was Governor-General. And it's been used at a number of great ceremonial occasions. But for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, this is what they do best. And the King and Queen were sat in the landau along with the Governor-General and her husband. And with the King and Queen and the Vice-Regal pair, they will now travel a short distance now that they've passed, along with many other members of the suite who have been both with the King and Queen flying over to Canada, but also those who look after the Governor-General here in the city. And there, the scene outside the building for the Senate as they await those carriages. It's a short distance now for the carriages to reach this point, and they will come in from the right-hand side of our picture. The flag of Canada is flying, but we will see the moment the King of Canada alights the carriage that the 21-gun salute of welcome to the Sovereign will be fired by the guns. They're coming to attention. And the sound of the crowd is just going to build up now as the King and Queen with the Governor-General and the Governor-General's husband come in the state landau here to the opening of the 45th Parliament of Canada.
Olha o rei, a rainha na carruagem, diretamente aqui de Ottawa.
This royal visit may be fleeting, but it's a moment being met with all the pomp and
querido
pageantry,
seguidor, meu querido
along with the
cliente,
special
muito orgulho de
Australian
estar
touch.
aqui.
The carriage, the King and Queen are then
The
taken
King wearing around his neck the badge as Sovereign of the Order of Canada,
Acompanha aí, etc e tal.
with
Fica ligado, porque
the Queen recently sworn as a member of the Canadian Privy Council, and with them in the carriage, the Governor-General, Her Excellency the Right Honourable Mary Simon, and her husband, His Excellency Whit Fraser. Governor-General first to alight with the Queen and the King.
O sol aqui tá muito forte hoje, muito forte. Tem horas que a gente já aqui em pé e tudo esperando. E chegou esse grande momento histórico.
And the guns will be fired as Black Rod, who is Greg Peters, he's been in that role for some time, welcomes His Majesty. And he will get into a position where he can receive the Royal Salute from the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, as the escort of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police pulls away. And we will have the national anthem and the firing of the 21 guns. The King will now wait while the troops of the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, are taken out of the Royal Salute, and their commander will come over and present to the King and invite him to inspect his Guard of Honour. For the King, who knows his responsibilities as head of state here, the chance to look into the eyes of those members of the Royal Canadian Regiment, the senior regiment of infantry in Canada, and to know that their cap badge still bears the cipher of VRI of his forebear, Queen Victoria, who was sovereign of Canada right at the start of the story of its evolution from dominion status within the empire to full independence. And it was his mother who gave royal assent to the last act in the British Parliament that repatriated full powers to Canada, and that was the Canada Act in 1982. And his mother, Elizabeth II, came to mark that significant moment when Canada achieved full independence, with Elizabeth II then as its head of state and the King here as Canada's head of state, in order to fulfill those words in the national anthem, "The true North, strong and free," which perhaps he may refer to in his speech from the throne, because it is at the start of the 45th Parliament that His Majesty the King has come here to mark this moment. It's not a requirement for the sovereign to be here. Indeed, the 23rd Parliament was opened in 1957 by Elizabeth II. The King's grandfather, George VI, came here in 1939 on a state visit, but although he came to the Senate and sat on the throne in the Senate building, it was only to give effect to Canadian acts that had been passed through the Canadian Parliament. The King will now make his way into the Senate building after completing the honours received by this Guard of Honour, and reactions from all those who have managed to get a view of this event. And you can hear the pipes too, and it was largely Scots who had left Scotland and come over during more challenging times that created the original settlements here and the Queen with the Governor-General there and her consort with the Prime Minister and his wife, waiting for the King to complete his receipt of this Guard of Honour on arrival to open Parliament. The King's chosen to take this moment because it does provide him, on this very short visit, the chance to meet the band who've been playing their music in traditional way, coming over to thank the Director of Music and the musicians themselves who have played music here, and echoing that strong Scots tradition that Canada takes very pridely. There are a number of regiments that still wear the kilt and continue those traditions, not least the Black Watch of Montreal, the Toronto Scottish, and other regiments who continue the traditions that started in Scotland and have been evolved to Canada's own. For the Prime Minister, a moment of some importance. He wanted to mark the beginning of the 45th Parliament by making sure that he asked and gave higher case advice to His Majesty the King to come here to his realm as King of Canada and open his Parliament. The Constitution of Canada places executive power for and over Canada in the King, but that executive power is exercised on his behalf by the Governor-General, who acts as a vice-regal head of state on behalf of the King here in Canada. He will return to the stage, set up for him the saluting base, and receive the final salute from those troops who have come here. And to his right, fluttering in the breeze, the Royal Standard of Canada. The Commander of the Guard goes into position in order to give the final compliment before the opening of Parliament to the King. Once again, those lyrics, which really are at the heart of this event here. The lyrics of the national anthem of Canada. O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot, love thou dost in us command. We see thee rising fair, dear land, the true north, strong and free. And stand on guard, O Canada. We stand on guard for thee. As the King escorted into the Senate building, led by Black Rod, who will become the King's messenger shortly, followed by the Governor-General and the Prime Minister. They will head inside, where they will be met by representatives. Meanwhile, inside the chamber, the Senate chamber itself. There is a sort of atmosphere of readiness. I can see the former Prime Minister, Trudeau, just in front of the two thrones there. All the other representatives, including the senior lawyers who are in position and representatives of the First Nation and others who have been invited to take part in this opening of Parliament. There's a buzz, certainly. Shortly it will be brought to heel as Blackrod comes closer. But in amongst the many of the chiefs of the First Nations, including the principal representative of them here, who will be today Chief Greg Sarrazin, the chief of the Algonquins, and each of them here to represent those First Nation traditions. Also the lieutenant governors of the different provinces and also the commissioners of the 3 territories. There are 10 provinces in Canada and 3 territories, and their 13 coats of arms have been placed around this temporary Senate chamber. The Senate chamber has been built here in what was one of the principal railway stations here in Ottawa. In fact, as the King's procession approaches, you will see it'll come through the concourse of that railway station, and one of the benches that used to be used by travellers has been replaced there to remind everyone of that tradition. But here, the desks have been taken from the original Senate chamber and have been placed here in this temporary one. The thrones from the original Senate chamber are being developed and restored, and these new thrones, which come from, as I was saying, the tree that felled itself in one of the storms at Windsor Great Park and was given by Elizabeth II to her nation of Canada, and they have been formed into these 2 throne chairs. There's also a third, which is normally in place for the Speaker of the Senate, and that will be replaced. But the 2 throne chairs always remain and are used for the throne speech that is given at the start of every session of the Parliaments by the Governor-General when she comes and reads the speech from the throne. But this is the opening of that Parliament, and to those throne chairs, for the second time in Canadian history, will come the Sovereign of Canada in order to carry out an opening ceremony. Either side of the throne chairs, the flag of Canada that was chosen and adopted as the emblem of Canada in the 1960s, and either side of that, in the panelling, is shown the flowing of those maple leaf flags, and that motif is carried out on the carpet too. You can see there are maple leaves all over the red carpet on which all those people present are having their conversation. Doubtless after the recent election, many of them talking about what might be in the speech from the throne delivered today by the King. Some of them wondering quite in what way the King will refer to the elephant in the room, as it were, which is the issue that has brought the King to open this Parliament, and that is the recent challenges that have been made from the southern neighbour of Canada, and that is the President of the United States calling Canada perhaps one day the 51st state. But whatever is in the throne speech, I think for all Canadians, it is significant that the Sovereign has come to read this speech at a time when whatever views may be around the world, or indeed in the United States of America, that Canada felt a statement that couldn't be ignored had been made by President Trump, and certainly Mark Carney, after being successfully with his party restored to power as Prime Minister, felt it necessary to go immediately to London and give higher case advice. That's the advice monarchs need to take, to travel here to Canada in order to underscore the unique sovereignty of Canada as an independent nation with its head of state, the King. And it will be visibly significant, although it was traditional for his grandfather to come in full dress uniform of a field marshal and give his speech from the throne in 1939 at a time of great challenge to the world, as the sounds were very unsettling again from Europe, from Adolf Hitler, from the evolution of Nazi propaganda and rhetoric, both from Germany and also from Italy. And those reverberations were felt by the newly crowned King, George VI, and he came with his wife, Queen Elizabeth, who always adored Canada. She came back as often as she could, even in older age, and used to start most of her speeches with how much she was thrilled to be back in Canada. So many representatives of the traditions of Canada will be gathered here today, and it is significant that because the King is here, they will be playing their part in witnessing the King give his speech from the throne. When the King arrives, he will take his seat. He will, as we look at it, be on the left hand of the thrones, looking into the Senate, with the Queen on the right-hand side as we look at the thrones. And to the King's, or to the left of the King, will sit the Prime Minister, and to the right of the Queen will sit the leader of the government in the Senate. The Governor-General will also take her place, and then the Speaker of the Senate will give, in words, instruction to Blackrod to process from here and return to the entrance where we saw the King arriving just now, and he will alight into a small car and head off that short distance, about 3 or 4 blocks, to where the House of Commons is currently waiting to receive their instruction from the Senate to travel to the Senate and hear the speech from the throne. I'm afraid my knowledge of who the senators are is sketchy, but I do know that the former Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, is there speaking to some of the senators. He handed over his position as Prime Minister, which Mark Carney took on, and then came the election. And it was perhaps thought at the outset of the election that a different party would be successful, but perhaps for the very same reason that the King is here, the issues that arose out of the tariff challenges, but also the fact that there was this challenge from the President of the United States that Canada should become the 51st state and that Trudeau should be called Governor Trudeau. These are issues that hurt and impacted many Canadians, and now people are being encouraged, despite the need for selfies, to take their seats, because very shortly the procession led by Blackrod will come to the chamber of the Senate, and the process for this ceremony will continue. But I think that for Mr. Trudeau, who had been in a position of leadership for so long, it is probably quite difficult to find the moment right to go and take his seat at the start of this ceremony. But meanwhile, the King and the Queen, along with others who will be in the procession, are taking their places and preparing to come to the Senate. As I say, there'll be a long wait between the arrival of the King and the arrival of members of the Commons. It will take time for all of those who are in the House of Commons at the moment to make their journey. They'll probably come in minibuses, so we expect about an 18-minute delay between Blackrod leaving and the King starting to read the speech from the throne. And we wait to see that process begin, and shortly the King will be brought in. The timings are being watched very closely. There was an awareness to make sure that plenty of the guests needed to come from some distance, and that they have done now. And it will be, for the King, a chance perhaps to read the speech another time before he has to deliver it. But it will provide all those the chance. As the hush settles, we see the representatives of the judiciary in position, echoing again a tradition that started in the Middle Ages in England, of the judiciary being placed on the woolsack immediately in front of the thrones. The hush of anticipation for this, the second time the Sovereign of Canada has read the speech from the throne at the opening of a parliament. This, the 45th parliament in Canada since the first met in 1867. Representatives of First Nations, the Inuits, also are coming in to take their position. They've been presented to the King earlier on. And various members of Blackrod's staff just now making sure that the final guests can take their position before the King is brought through the tunnel outside and through the former gathering point for travellers heading to New York from Ottawa, used to mingle and assemble. Now, the whole of what was the concourse has been cleared, and the paintings of former speakers of the Senate, former sovereigns, and former governors general adorn the walls, along with contemporary artworks from the 10 provinces of Canada and the 3 territories. The procession will be led in by Blackrod, along with the Secretary to the King in Canada, and the trumpeters are ready to sound the sovereign salute as the King of Canada enters his Senate. As I say, once the King has taken his position, there'll then be a long wait while Blackrod travels to the House of Commons, which is in the west block of the Parliament estate, a fair way down Wellington Street, where we saw a short time ago the Royal Canadian Mounted Police bringing the King to this historic second opening of the Canadian Parliament by a British sovereign, who, of course, in this case, sets that responsibility aside and is wholly and entirely the Sovereign of Canada. Canadian identity is caught into the crown. If you travel from the United States to Canada, you see the shield shape with the stars and stripes is replaced by a symbol of the crown on all the freeways. The crown is at the heart and holds together the fabric of Canada. It makes it different. It encompasses what Canada has become, what Canada achieved from being initially a colony, becoming a dominion, being granted greater and greater independence, and finally repatriating all its independence in 1982, and in the time of Elizabeth II, quite a step from the nation that started to form back in the 1860s. My great-great-grandfather was Governor General of Canada when the Parliament was in Montreal, and the Scots majority at the time, who were not a majority in that Parliament, tried to persuade him to overrule the will of that Parliament. He refused to give assent to the bill, which they believed should be rediverted. He insisted on following the will of the majority of members of Parliament. The Scots majority was so upset they set light to the Parliament, and if you go to Montreal, you will find the ruins of that old Parliament. And he immediately removed the authority of Montreal as the capital city at that point. And this meant that all the press in Montreal lost their power. And it was Queen Victoria who chose that the new capital city for Canada would be here in Ottawa. And as a result of that, Canada moved gradually towards responsible self-government. And in 1867, the British North America Act created a dominion. The King and Queen have had a chance to meet quite a lot of representatives of the different parties prior to this opening of Parliament, and the Black Rod now leads in His Majesty the King of Canada to open the 45th Parliament of his nation. You're watching the state trumpeters in the Senate chamber in Ottawa, Canada, awaiting the arrival of the King of Canada and the Queen for the opening of Parliament. The King will invite everyone to sit. The Speaker of the Senate will now give instruction to Black Rod.
Usher of the Black Rod, you will proceed to the House of Commons and acquaint that House that it is the pleasure of His Majesty the King that they attend him immediately in the Senate chamber. Huissier du bâton noir, rendez-vous à la Chambre des communes et informez-la que c'est le plaisir de Sa Majesté le Roi que les communes se rendent immédiatement auprès de lui dans la salle du Sénat.
And with that instruction, Black Rod will take his leave by bowing to the king. He'll do this 3 times as he makes his way down the Senate chamber. He will return a bow and take his hat off as the king and queen sit in the thrones that were presented by the king's mother, Elizabeth II, from a fallen tree in Windsor Great Park, and they've been fashioned into the thrones in this temporary Senate building. And Black Rod will take his route back to the entrance of the building, where he will get into a vehicle and make his way to where the House of Commons of Canada is, which is about 4 blocks away at the west block of the old focus of the parliamentary estate. And we will be entertained here in the Senate chamber with events that will take place and presentations that will be made to the King and Queen to reflect the history and uniqueness of Canada. It will take approximately 18 minutes now for the members of the House of Commons to assemble here in the Senate chamber. Black Rod has a journey to make, and when he arrives at the House of Commons, he will go to the door of the Commons, which will be slammed in his face in exactly the same way as tradition established in England first and now the United Kingdom. And the Black Rod will then hammer the door 3 times using the base of the black rod. The door will be opened and he will proceed into the Commons, bowing to the Speaker and to those present 3 times. And then he will present that invitation from the King, requiring the House of Commons to come to the Senate chamber and to hear the speech from the throne. And while that takes place, the Commons will then gather in a way very similar to what we see at Westminster, and will leave, and they will get into minibuses, and they will come this distance. And the reason it's like this is that at the moment, Canada's Parliament building is undergoing extensive renovation. Normally, the Senate chamber is but a few hundred yards away from the House of Commons, very much as it is in the Palace of Westminster. But this Senate chamber has been rebuilt in an old railway station, and it has been converted into a place where the Senate can operate effectively, scrutinising bills that come from the House of Commons. And therefore it will be of interest to the senators who are gathered here enjoying the music of Canada's story to contemplate what that speech will have. And we can see former Prime Minister Trudeau sat there amongst those who are guests today, not least the Lieutenant Governors of the 10 provinces of Canada, but also the commissioners who represent the 3 territories in the Northwest. The King will now take leave of the chamber, which will enable those gathered here to have their conversation again while the time takes, as the King can then meet more people who are being presented to His Majesty by the Governor-General. Normally, the Governor-General herself would read the speech from the throne, and at the start of every session of every Parliament, this is the tradition. A recent Governor-General needed to stand down, and then it was the head of the judiciary who stood in as Commissioner for the nation. Normally, while waiting for the House of Commons to get here, the Governor-General of the day takes this opportunity to go and do exactly what the King is doing and meeting the judiciary and others of those who are gathered here in order to get the chance on this very brief visit for the King to Canada to perform this constitutional task, being escorted round all those who play their part in the clerking of this Senate and making sure that the business follows according to the strictures set out by the legislative programme. It's an informal moment within a formal structure, and for the King a chance to meet those who have gathered here, many of the senators who represent all those different parts of Canada, the 10 provinces that carry names that cross the nation from the west coast to the east coast and which reach from the Pacific to the Atlantic. Meanwhile, Black Rod will be making his way in his car to the House of Commons, which, as I say, is a short distance away, but far enough for vehicles to be needed, both for him to get there and for all those to come back. But shortly, the House of Commons will gather here and the King will read the speech from the throne. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who is the architect of this royal visit to Canada, the King's first regnal visit as sovereign, making sure that the timing coincided with the start of the 45th Parliament at this politically sensitive time for Canada. And as clear an expression of Canadian independence that the King of Canada is here to play his part. So the 13 provinces and territories of Canada are Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador. They joined the Confederation more recently, but are now, of course, part of Canada. The Northwest Territories, Nova Scotia, Nunavut, Ontario, which is where this ceremony takes place today, Prince Edward Island, Quebec, Saskatchewan, and Yukon. And around this building, just beyond those gathered around this chamber, in fact, just beyond the heads that the King and Queen are able to talk to, are the coats of arms of each of those provinces and the 3 territories to mark the symbols that are flown and proudly borne by each of those provinces and territories, along with the maple leaf flag. King and Queen, who have each their equerries, who are here, as does the Governor-General and her husband. Their equerries are also here in uniform, and making sure that the King and Queen, in this time of waiting, get the chance to meet as many people as they can. Meanwhile, having arrived at the door of the House of Commons, it was slammed in Blackrod's face, and the doors have now been opened after he struck the door 3 times. And the Sergeant-at-Arms goes forward to tell the Speaker that there is a messenger at the door, and he will pick up the mace.
Mr. Speaker, a message from His Majesty the King. Monsieur le Président, un message de Sa Majesté le Roi.
Admit the messenger. Faites entrer le messager.
The Sergeant-at-Arms will now pick up the mace, which is the authority of the House of Commons, which he will carry with him to the Senate. And meanwhile, Blackrod will come forward after being granted permission to enter by the Sergeant-at-Arms, and he will bow 3 times to the chamber and make his way to the Speaker and issue the message from His Majesty the King, which, if you remember, the Speaker of the Senate conveyed. The second bow. And then forward for the third bow, and he will address all those present.
Mr. Speaker, it is the pleasure of His Majesty, the King of Canada, that this honourable House attend him immediately in the chamber of the Senate. Monsieur le Président, c'est le plaisir de Sa Majesté, le Roi du Canada, que cette honorable Chambre se rende immédiatement auprès de lui dans la Chambre du Sénat.
Blackrod returns, making the 3 obeisances to the Speaker of the House of Commons, and will then escort the gathered members of Parliament, along with the Speaker, all the way back to the Senate chamber. But it is, as I say, 3 or 4 blocks away, and there are vehicles to do it. The authorities of the House forming the procession, and those representatives of the House of Commons who have been able to come, and I'm sure there are a representative number to make this journey on behalf of all the others, because there is a limited amount of room, as we saw, in the Senate chamber for them all to squeeze in. There are a large number of members in the House of Commons, as they're the coat of arms of the King of Canada over this Senate chamber, waiting for the arrival. It'll take some time for them to process through the West Block, come to where the minibuses are awaiting, and then come along Wellington Street, much as we saw the King earlier on in his carriage procession to this place. Former Governors-General there being spoken to by the Prime Minister. Former Governors-General who continue to wear the insignia of the Order of Canada, which they had the responsibility for overseeing on behalf of the late Queen and the present King, continue to wear that insignia, which is highly prized. The Order of Canada is based on the shape of a snowflake, and it is designed to evoke so much of the tradition of Canada. And Ottawa, for much of the year, does have a large amount of snow. And you can see on the carpets there the emblems of Canada in gold and black into the red colour of Canada itself. The King getting a chance to speak to more of the senior justices of Canada. And I pointed out earlier that they sit across ways in the chamber of the Senate, looking straight at the throne, much as since medieval times the judges do in Parliament in the United Kingdom, particularly at a state opening. The King has fitted in a great deal to his visit to Canada. He arrived only yesterday. The purpose of it is very much this emblematic representation of the sovereignty he represents as head of state of Canada, being present at the opening of the 45th Parliament. There is a reality to what it means that the King has come to be the second sovereign only to open a Parliament in Canada since the first Parliament met in 1867, when Queen Victoria was Queen. The only other sovereign to come here, that was in 1957, when Elizabeth II, on her first visit to Canada, coincided with the end of a general election and the start of a Parliament. Normally, Parliament is opened by the Governor-General, who is the vice-regal representative of the King. And in the Constitution of Canada, executive power for and over Canada is vested in the King, but exercised on his behalf by the Governor-General. The First Nation representatives, who have a huge role to play, particularly with their association with the territories, the aspiration of the 3 territories to become provinces in due course. This is a matter that maybe this Parliament will address. It's certainly been in discussion for some time, taking then the number of provinces of Canada from 10 to 13. But the King's presence here gently to underscore a reaction to President Trump's comment that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. So we will see shortly. The King will have a chance to read the speech from the throne here in the Senate at Ottawa. The King and Queen have returned to take their positions on the thrones which were presented to Canada by Elizabeth II from a tree that was felled in Canada. And everyone is just going to now take their positions, ready for the arrival of the House of Commons. As I say, it's some distance from the House of Commons chamber back here to the chamber of the Senate. When the time comes, the King will be presented his speech by his secretary here in Canada, Mr. Donald Booth, who will, at the end of the reading of the speech, take it from His Majesty again and then take a written representation of it and give it to the Speaker of the Senate and to the Speaker of the House of Commons. In the old days, of course, this was the only means by which the words that had been issued on behalf of the sovereign by the Governor-General, or in this case by the King of Canada, could be then conveyed to all members of Parliament and senators. Nowadays, of course, it will be immediately put electronically for distribution across all media. Imagine the conversation between the Prime Minister and the King, which of course has led to this point and which has achieved for Canada this higher case advice to the sovereign that he should come in person to read the speech from the throne. The King will have been discussing with the Prime Minister of Canada the extra bits that he will say at the start and at the conclusion of the speech, which will be cleared by the Government of Canada, but will be his chance, I think, to express how he feels about Canada, what Canada means to him as its sovereign, and maybe reflect upon the traditions of his forebears as sovereigns of this enormous country of Canada. The leader of the government in the Senate is talking to the Queen as well, which gives both of them the chance to hear exactly how the political challenges of this new Parliament are settling down, both in the House of Commons and in the Senate itself. Music continues to be played to those who are gathered here waiting uniquely for this amount of time in order for the buses to bring members of Parliament along Wellington Street. It's the most gorgeous weather out there. There are quite a lot of people from the crowds who had the fun of watching the King and Queen with the Governor-General and her husband come down Wellington Street earlier on in order to attend this opening of Parliament. A signal being given that the procession is about to come through what is called the tunnel, which is just outside this area of the Senate. There's also the part of the building that was once the concourse for the railway station for people who were catching trains literally in this area, which is now playing its part as the Senate of Canada. And trains went from here, from the capital of Canada, Ottawa, all the way down to New York, a railway line that has been merged and other arrangements have been made. And this building was left unused, and yet it has now been revived and turned into a temporary location for the Senate of Canada. It will take many years for the work to be completed, and the thrones that were given by Elizabeth II, which you can see now, the King has just behind him the coat of arms of the King of Canada, encircled by the motto of the Order of Canada, which is, "We aspire to build a better nation." And it is for that reason, that independence, that identity, that Prime Minister, the Honourable Mark Carney, has brought the King of Canada here to play this uniquely important constitutional role of sovereignty in front of the world. To this old railway station, in a way, has come the identity of a nation that has found it uncomfortable to hear messages from its closest neighbour, with whom, for generations, really since the 1840s, 1850s, when relations between Canada and the United States started to heal after the wars of independence, which saw the United States become an independent nation in 1776. There was a war in 1812 between Canada and the United States, a war in which the Canadians took their violence all the way down to Washington and burnt down the White House. But since then, and certainly since the 1850s, when the Governor-General at the time, Lord Elgin, made his way down with his principal advisor, Oliphant, and made negotiations with the government of the United States. And relations have built and built since then. And so this moment of challenge, particularly for two allied nations, nations that together fought in the First and Second World War, albeit then Canada, although a province, was part of the British Empire fighting in the First and Second World War, but of course as allies in both instances with soldiers, sailors, airmen and women from the United States. And that relationship between the United States and Canada challenged, as we hear all call to order, as Black Rod comes to the bar of the Senate with the House of Commons. And that will take place almost immediately. And with the call to order, the Prime Minister will take his seat again, as will the leader of the government in the Senate. They will sit either side of the King and Queen. And once the King and Queen hear that the arrival of the Commons is imminent, the speech from the throne will be presented to the King by his secretary, Donald Booth. With the three bows, Black Rod, returning with the House of Commons, will take his position beside the King.
Order! An order!
The newly elected Speaker of the House of
May
Commons.
it please Your Majesty. The House of Commons has elected me their Speaker, though I am but little able to fulfill the important duties thus assigned to me. If in the performance of those duties I should at any time fall into error, I pray that the fault may be imputed to me and not to the House of Commons, whose servant I am, and who, through me, the better to enable them to discharge their duty to their king and country, humbly claim all their undoubted rights and privileges, especially that they may have freedom of speech in their debates, access to Your Majesty's person at all seasonable times, and that their proceedings may receive from Your Majesty the most favorable construction. Qu'il plaise à Votre Majesté. La Chambre des communes m'a élu président, bien que je sois peu capable de remplir les devoirs
A
importants.
powerful declaration from the Speaker of the House of Commons directly to the King. He was dragged to the Speaker's chair yesterday after election by members of Parliament, echoing the fact that in the time of King Charles I, it was an unpopular job. People became fearful of doing it unless kings might take off their heads or put them in jail. So he declares clearly the privileges of the House of Commons before the King and also his loyalty to the King, and asked, as you may have noticed, that the King should understand if there should be any disagreement between the House of Commons and the King himself.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded by His Majesty the King to declare to you that he freely confides in the duty and attachment of the House of Commons to His Majesty's person and government, and not doubting that their proceedings will be conducted with wisdom, temper, and prudence, he grants and upon all occasions will recognize and allow their constitutional privileges. I am commanded also to assure you that the Commons shall have ready access to His Majesty upon all seasonable occasions, and that their proceedings, as well as your words and actions, will constantly receive from Him the most favorable construction. Monsieur le Président, Sa Majesté le Roi me charge de vous dire que, ayant pleine confiance dans le loyalisme et l'attachement de la Chambre des communes envers la personne
On behalf of the King, a recognition that the Speaker of the House of Commons and the privileges he has asked the King to respect will be respected, and he is recognized. And shortly, His Majesty the King, on this moment of great importance for Canada, will speak to Canada as he opens the 45th Parliament of Canada and will give his own expression of kingship and of the importance of the independence of Canada.
Honourable Senators, members of the House of Commons, it is with a deep sense of pride and pleasure that my wife and I join you here today as we witness Canadians coming together in a renewed sense of national pride, unity and hope. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is a recognition of shared history as a nation, while continuing to deepen my own understanding. It is my great hope that in each of your communities and collectively as a country, a path is found toward truth and reconciliation in both word and deed. This is my 20th visit to Canada, spread over the course of more than half a century, and my first as sovereign. As I've said before, every time I come to Canada, a little more of Canada seeps into my bloodstream, and from there, straight to my heart. I've always had the greatest admiration for Canada's unique identity, which is recognized across the world for bravery and sacrifice in defense of national values and for the diversity and kindness of Canadians. To the First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples, you have welcomed my family and myself to your traditional lands with great warmth and hospitality, for which I am humbly grateful. This year, we mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day and VJ Day. On Juno Beach, at Dieppe, on the Somme, at Beaumont-Hamel, at Ypres, and on Vimy Ridge. At those places and many others, forever etched into our memories, Canadians fought and died alongside our closest allies. Aujourd'hui, je vois des élus venant d'un bout à l'autre du Canada, de Saint-Jean's à Terre-Neuve et Labrador, de Victoria en Colombie-Britannique et d'Arviat au Nunavut. Je vois des gardiens des droits et libertés garantis par la Charte canadienne. En tant que roi, je tiens à vous remercier de vous mettre au service de vos compatriotes, d'un bout ou l'autre de ce grand et beau pays. You speak for your communities, representing an incredible richness of cultures, languages, and perspectives. We owe it to this generation and those who succeed us to think and act for the greater good of all. While the world faces unprecedented challenges, generating uncertainties across the continents with regards to peace and stability, economics and climate change, your communities have the skills and determination to bring a wealth of solutions. En encourageant la collaboration et en tenant des débats respectueux et constructifs, vous permettrez à ce gouvernement d'agir de façon audacieuse et juste pour le bien des Canadiens et des Canadiennes. It has been nearly 70 years since the Sovereign first opened Parliament. In the time since, Canada has dramatically changed, repatriating its constitution, achieving full independence, and witnessing immense growth. Canada has embraced its British, French, and Indigenous roots and become a bold, ambitious, innovative country that is bilingual, truly multicultural, and committed to reconciliation. The Crown has for so long been a symbol of unity for Canada. It also represents stability and continuity from the past to the present. As it should, it stands proudly as a symbol of Canada today in all her richness and dynamism. When my dear late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, opened a new Canadian Parliament in 1957, the Second World War remained a fresh, painful memory. The Cold War was intensifying. Freedom and democracy were under threat. Canada was emerging as a growing economic power and a force for peace in the world. In the decades since, history has been punctuated by epoch-making events: the Vietnam War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the start of the War on Terror. Today, Canada faces another critical moment. Democracy, pluralism, the rule of law, self-determination, and freedom are values which Canadians hold dear, and ones which the government is determined to protect. The system of open global trade that, while not perfect, has helped to deliver prosperity for Canadians for decades, is changing. Canada's relationships with partners are also changing. Il nous faut confronter la réalité. Depuis la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, notre monde n'a jamais été aussi dangereux et instable. Le Canada fait face à des défis qui, dans nos vies, sont sans précédent. Many Canadians are feeling anxious and worried about the drastically changing world around them. Fundamental change is always unsettling. Yet this moment is also an incredible opportunity, an opportunity for renewal, an opportunity to think big and to act bigger, an opportunity for Canada to embark on the largest transformation of its economy since the Second World War. A confident Canada, which has welcomed new Canadians, including from some of the most tragic global conflict zones, can seize this opportunity by recognizing that all Canadians can give themselves far more than any foreign power on any continent can ever take away. And that by staying true to Canadian values, Canada can build new alliances and a new economy that serves all Canadians. The Prime Minister and the President of the United States, for example, have begun defining a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the United States, rooted in mutual respect and founded on common interests, to deliver transformational benefits for both sovereign nations. Simultanément, le gouvernement œuvre à renforcer ses relations avec des partenaires commerciaux et des alliés fiables. Sachons que le Canada possède ce dont notre monde a besoin et défend les valeurs que ce monde respecte. Le Canada est prêt à bâtir une coalition de nations qui partagent ces valeurs, qui croient en la coopération internationale et le libre-échange de biens, de services et d'idées. Dans ce monde nouveau, qui évolue à un rythme frénétique, le Canada tracera la voie à suivre. La démonstration en sera faite dès juin, quand le Canada présidera le sommet du G7. The government is guided by its conviction that the economy is only truly strong when it serves everyone. Many Canadians are struggling to get ahead. The government is responding, reducing middle-class taxes and saving two-income families up to $840 a year. It will cut the GST on homes at or under $1 million for first-time home buyers, delivering savings of up to $50,000. And it will lower the GST on homes between $1 million and $1.5 million. Le gouvernement assurera la pérennité de programmes qui permettent déjà aux familles d'économiser des milliers de dollars par année, notamment ceux pour les garderies et l'assurance médicaments. À ces progrès s'ajoute l'élargissement du régime canadien de soins dentaires, qui sera bientôt accessible à environ 8 millions de Canadiens et de Canadiennes, leur permettant d'économiser plus de $800 par année en moyenne. The government's overarching goal, its core mission, is to build the strongest economy in the G7. That starts with creating one Canadian economy out of 13. Internal barriers to trade and labour mobility cost Canada as much as $200 billion each year. The government will introduce legislation to remove all remaining federal barriers to internal trade and labour mobility by Canada Day. Les premiers ministres de plusieurs provinces et territoires ont déjà pris des mesures pour éliminer les obstacles au commerce intérieur. Le gouvernement va s'appuyer sur ces progrès pour créer, d'ici la fête du Canada, un réel système de libre-échange à travers le pays. Il s'agit d'efforts essentiels pour permettre au Canada de réaliser tout son potentiel économique, mais cela reste insuffisant. To build Canada strong, the government is working closely with provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples to identify and catalyse projects of national significance. Projects that will connect Canada, that will deepen Canada's ties with the world and that will create high-paying jobs for generations. Given the pace of change and the scale of opportunities, speed is of the essence. Through the creation of a new major federal project office, the time needed to approve a project will be reduced from 5 years to 2, all while upholding Canada's world-leading environmental standards and its constitutional obligations to Indigenous peoples. The government will also strike cooperation agreements with every interested province and territory within 6 months to realize its goal of one project, one review. When Canadians come together, Canada builds things that last. Éliminer ces obstacles qui freinent l'économie canadienne permettra l'avènement d'une nouvelle ère de croissance grâce à laquelle le Canada va non seulement surmonter des guerres commerciales, mais en émerger plus fort que jamais. Cela lui permettra de devenir une superpuissance en matière d'énergie verte et conventionnelle, de bâtir une stratégie industrielle qui rendra le Canada plus compétitif à l'international, tout en luttant contre les changements climatiques, de bâtir des centaines de milliers de bonnes carrières dans les métiers spécialisés, et donc de faire du Canada une plaque tournante pour la science et l'innovation. Critically, the government will undertake a series of measures to help double the rate of home building while creating an entirely new housing industry, using Canadian technology, Canadian skilled workers, and Canadian lumber. The government will introduce measures to deliver affordable homes by creating Build Canada Homes. This mission-driven organization will act to accelerate the development of new affordable housing. It will invest in the growth of the prefabricated and modular housing industry, and it will provide significant financing to affordable home builders. The government will make the housing market work better, including by cutting municipal development charges in half for all multi-unit housing. The government will drive supply up to bring housing costs down. To be truly strong, Canada must be secure. To that end, the government will introduce legislation to enhance security at Canada's borders. Law enforcement and intelligence agencies will have new tools to stop the flow of fentanyl and its precursors. The Canada Border Services Agency will be given new powers to examine goods destined for export to prevent the transport of illegal and stolen products, including cars. Le gouvernement protégera la souveraineté du Canada en rebâtissant, réarmant et réinvestissant dans les forces armées canadiennes. Il stimulera l'industrie militaire canadienne en prenant part au plan Réarm Europe et contribuera ainsi avec des partenaires européens à la sécurité transatlantique. Et il investira pour renforcer sa présence dans le Nord, alors que cette région, qui est partie intégrante de la nation canadienne, fait face à de nouvelles menaces. The government will discharge its duty to protect Canadians and their sovereign rights from wherever challenges may come, at home or abroad. To keep communities safe, the government will hire 1,000 more RCMP personnel. It will change firearms licensing and strengthen enforcement of yellow and red flag laws. Weapons licenses for those convicted of intimate partner violence and those subject to protection orders will be revoked. Through the deployment of scanners, drones, and helicopters, additional personnel, and canine teams, the government will stem the tide of illegal guns and drugs across the border. It will take these steps while protecting the rights of law-abiding gun owners and indigenous peoples' long-standing hunting traditions. The government will bring a renewed focus on car theft and home invasions by toughening the criminal code to make bail harder to get for repeat offenders charged with committing these crimes, along with human trafficking and drug smuggling. During this time of great change, Canadians are uniting behind what makes Canada unique. La langue française et la culture québécoise sont au cœur de l'identité canadienne. Elles définissent le pays que les Canadiens, les Canadiennes et moi aimons tant. Le Canada est un pays où l'on respecte et célèbre les langues officielles et les langues autochtones. Le gouvernement est déterminé à protéger les institutions qui font rayonner ces cultures et cette identité dans le monde entier, comme CBC Radio-Canada. Protéger ce qui nous donne accès à des aliments frais, sains et de qualité, les producteurs agricoles, et protéger la gestion de l'offre. Nature is core to Canada's identity. In 2022, Canada convened COP15 in Montreal, which concluded with 196 countries striking a historic agreement to protect 30% of their lands and 30% of waters by 2030. To this end, the government will protect more of Canada's nature than ever before through the creation of new national parks, national urban parks, marine protected areas, and other conservation initiatives. The government will always protect the rights and freedoms that the Charter guarantees for every Canadian. The government will be a reliable partner to Indigenous peoples, upholding its fundamental commitment to advancing reconciliation. Central to this commitment is the creation of long-term wealth and prosperity with Indigenous peoples. For that reason, the government will double the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program from $5 billion to $10 billion, enabling more Indigenous communities to become owners of major projects. As Canada moves forward with nation-building projects, the government will always be firmly guided by the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. Canada's immigration system has long been a source of pride for Canadians and of dynamism for the economy. The government is dedicated to rebuilding the trust of Canadians in immigration by restoring balance to the system. Le gouvernement instaurera une limite sur le nombre de travailleurs étrangers temporaires et d'étudiants internationaux, établissant un plafond qui, à partir de 2027, sera en deçà de 5% de la population canadienne. Simultanément, il attirera les meilleurs talents dans le monde pour bâtir l'économie. Et il fera savoir aux Canadiens et aux Canadiennes qui travaillent à l'étranger que s'ils songent à revenir au pays, il n'y a pas de moment plus propice pour le faire. Dans toutes ces actions, le gouvernement sera guidé par une nouvelle discipline fiscale. Dépenser moins pour que les Canadiens puissent investir plus. Day-to-day government spending, the government's operating budget, has been growing by 9% every year. The government will introduce measures to bring it below 2%. Transfers to provinces, territories, or individuals will be maintained. The government will balance its operating budget over the next 3 years by cutting waste, capping the public service, ending duplication, and deploying technology to improve public sector productivity. In parallel, the government will take a series of measures to catalyse new investment, to create better jobs and higher incomes for Canadians. The scale of the government's initiative will match the challenges of our times and the ambitions of Canadians. Honourable Senators, members of the House of Commons, when my dear late mother addressed your predecessors 7 decades ago, she said that in that age and against the backdrop of international affairs, no nation could live unto itself. It is a source of great pride that in the following decades, Canada has continued to set an example to the world in her conduct and values as a force for good. À vous et à l'ensemble du peuple canadien, mon épouse et moi-même adressons nos sincères remerciements pour cet accueil des plus chaleureux. As the anthem reminds us, the true North is indeed strong and free. Members of the House of Commons, you will be asked to appropriate the funds to carry out the services and expenditures authorised by Parliament. May you honour the profound trust bestowed upon you by Canadians. And may God bless and guide you in all your duties.
The King of Canada has spoken to his Parliament in the Senate chamber in Ottawa, as requested by his Prime Minister, the Honourable Mark Carney. And in his statement, the speech from the throne, he reminded everyone the Crown has for so long been a symbol of unity for Canada. It also represents stability and continuity from the past to the present. He referred to the fact that the Prime Minister and the President of the United States were building up a relationship for the future rooted in mutual respect and founded on common interests. Copies of the King's speech from the throne are now taken and given to the Speaker of the House of Commons. For the King, this has been a constitutional duty done, and with his use of that word from the national anthem. The true north is indeed strong and free. The King has underscored Canada's sovereign identity as a nation, with him as its king and the crown as the focus for the nation and its future. For the King and the Queen, this constitutional duty is now done. And with the response and the applause of those present, the House of Commons, led by the Speaker, now returns to their place, where, just as in traditional form, they will debate the speech, which contained a great deal of the intent of the new government's agenda for Canada in this first session of the 45th Parliament. Meanwhile, for the King and Queen, duties will continue, and along with the Governor-General and the Governor-General's consort and with the Prime Minister, he will go from this Senate chamber and will shortly lay a wreath as sovereign to remember the enormous number referred to in his speech from the throne, who gave their lives in defending the world's principles and aspirations in 2 world wars. And the King reflected on the fact that Canada had done so and lost so many of its sons and daughters in fighting alongside its allies, not least the armies, navies, and air force of the United States. For the King, here in the centre of government, the Senate chamber, his duty as sovereign has been completed. And as he discusses his role with the Prime Minister who invited him here and gave him advice to be here, the King of Canada has done his duty.